Oh, hello, you caught me reading. Welcome to Billy's Books. I'm reading another book, another George R. Martin book, one you may have not heard of. You probably know Game of Thrones and a few other classic science fiction stories that he's written over the years, and some fantasies, of course. But this one, he himself, it came out in 1983, he himself described it as a flop. I suspect it's because there's no spaceships or no dragons, though there is a nurse mentioned in one of the chapters here that he refers to as a dragon lady. He being the protagonist, Sandy, who is, like many of George R. Martin's novels, kind of a variation on George R. Martin himself. If you've ever read his science fiction classic that I love that no one knows, Tough Voyaging, that's sort of George R. Martin who sort of owns his own spaceship and goes around doing good deeds or mischievous things while petting his cat and being a very fuddy-duddy character. I love that book. Someday I'll review it if I ever read it again. Anyway, so this book is, like many others, tad autobiographical. The protagonist's name is Sandy, and he is a writer who misses his deadlines. And as a matter of fact, he's stuck on page 37, where he's been stuck for weeks or months or whatever when his old editor calls. He used to write when he was younger. He used to write for a revolutionary magazine, or once revolutionary magazine that is now sold out, called The Hedgehog, or The Hog for short. This is kind of a Big Chill meets Spinal Tap story, because this is set in 1983 or the early 80s, but it's the characters, most of them were sort of in college in the late 60s and early 70s, which was during the Vietnam War and all sorts of revolutionary stuff. So anyway, there's a murder. There's a band called Nazgul, that's the Spinal Tap part, Tolkien-influenced name, and surprise, surprise, and I guess they're kind of like Led Zeppelin or the Beatles or something. They're really, really big and really popular, hard rock. But at one of their big shows, the lead singer is shot back in the early 70s, and now on the anniversary of that, one of their managers or booking agents or something is also shot, and so he gets back with that magazine and does some investigative reporting, going all over the country, meeting various people, meeting former members of the band who are still around, and also his former college mates, many of whom are revolutionaries themselves. That's right. That's a hound dog. So he visits these old friends, and a lot of his friends and the band members age differently. So one drummer, one guy in the band, the drummer, he just sort of owns his own bar, and he tries to give breaks to others who, since he got breaks himself. And one guy's just really bitter, and one guy's just totally out of the picture. And then some of his college mates, they've gone various routes. Some have sold out, some have found themselves, and some have just been crushed by society. But they all used to be really revolutionary, and when he meets them, he's sort of gotten out of touch, so when he sees them again, he's always very surprised. This version of George R. Martin, Sandy, he's kind of, what word am I looking for? He shoots from the hip, let's say that. He's got a big mouth. He shoots his mouth off when he shouldn't, gets himself into trouble. He's pretty fearless, which I guess is one of the fantasy versions of George R. R. Martin has for himself. And so he, just before, I'm about to read you a passage, and just before this passage, he shoots his mouth off to someone rather powerful, and feels the consequences, and he's in a pretty bad mood. But what's interesting for me about reading this book right now is that I'm living in St. Louis, and this is the first day of fall. But this is 2017, which will probably go down in history as either the beginning or just a crappy year, kind of like this. So St. Louis itself is filled with racial strife. You hear helicopters that may be traffic, and maybe cops hovering. We don't know. There's a lot of activity going on in St. Louis right now, and it's not pretty. And also at the same time, which is kind of disturbing, the Ken Burns documentary on PBS now is the Vietnam War, and so all these things are coming together. And to be reading this book at the same time is kind of interesting. So anyway, I'm going to read this little passage from this book, just a couple paragraphs or so. He's just driving and just sort of mulling over everything. He's sort of coming down from being really furious about something. All right. Charlie Manson and Richard Nixon, arms wrapped around each other. Was any one better or worse than the other, really? He saw them all. The young guardsmen at Kent State faced off against the SLA. The soldiers at My Lai danced with the Alfies. The well-dressed gentlemen from Dow Chemical, who made their nice profit from napalm, deplored the actions of the ragged black scum who burned down the ghettos during blackouts. The pushers, the assassins, the slumlords, all the faceless little men and women who thought that good and evil didn't apply to them, the ones who were just getting by, the ones who read their Bible and did the work for the Lord, the ones who had to be practical, the ones who took orders, who only worked here, who were just carrying out company policy, and their reflections, the opposites, the ones who lived for a cause and died for a cause and killed for a cause, who were blind to the gray of human souls and the red of human blood. Once Sandy had been able to tell them apart, the good guys and the bad guys. Now they all looked alike to him. So, it's kind of a bit of a zeitgeist. Anyway, I'm enjoying the book. I got it from the library, St. Louis Public Library. A wonderful thing. I recommend you go to the library too and read this book if you feel like it, or if you don't, don't. If you can't do, review.